All right, so we're gonna get started. Hopefully, some of you have read the report, so you have a little bit of context. I'm gonna try to keep the talking portion brief and hopefully spend at least 10 minutes at the end for with discussion with you all. I want to start by thanking the investors of the Center for Housing Solutions. Robin, do you want to record this? Is this or no? I just before I'm realizing that we haven't. Robin, sorry guys.
Sorry, Elka, it is recording.
Oh, it is recording. Oh, that's awkward. Okay. Well, thanks so much to our the investors of the Center for Housing Solutions for the support. We could not do this work without you. I also want to thank those who spent time interviewing with me for this specific project. We had teams from HCR, leadership, and the entire data team met with me, Hudson River Housing, the City of New Rochelle. We met with Shelter Force. Miriam Axel-Lute has done quite a bit of AMI related research in the past. So we did have quite a robust list of interviewees for this, and I just want to thank everyone for, the thought that has been put into this topic before. This presentation, this paper is mostly it's a consolidation of a lot of data and a lot of really critical research that's been done over the years, and hopefully the way that we've packaged it is helpful for you all. So briefly, this is what we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about the origins of AMI. We're going to talk about the problems with it and where it kind of falls short, and then a few solutions or ideas of how to work within the system we have. Because really, one of the findings is that it's AMI is so entrenched in the systems that we have that it's not going anywhere. So how do we use it to our advantage? So, in a nutshell, AMI is the midpoint of all household incomes in any area, which is to be distinguished from the average, right? The mean would be, aggregating summing the sum of all incomes, dividing by the number of households. This is actually just the midpoint. And what's good about a midpoint statistically is that it removes the influence of outliers. So if you have people with very, 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 very high income, uh, it doesn't pull the midpoint higher the same way as a mean or an average would. And essentially, we use AMI to express income thresholds for the programs that we use. So many of you have heard 50% AMI, 80% AMI, even 120% AMI in some instances. And we use those in both rental, housing, and ownership programs. So LIHTC is obviously a very common one, mandatory affordable housing set-asides on a municipal level, and for ownership, mortgage programs and subsidy programs like AHOP. By the way, this cartoon is from Asheville, North Carolina. I don't think it's very funny. I thought it was interesting that someone in the world is making a cartoon about AMI. And certainly what it does show us is that this issue obviously is not unique to the Hudson Valley, but you may as well replace the AVL with HV, and we've got ourselves a cartoon. So AMI was introduced when public housing became a heavy investment on the federal level. And the interesting thing about how AMI was introduced is that the intention was to make sure that public housing did not compete in the private market. And so AMI thresholds were set intentionally low at the request of developers, such that there would be a clear distinction between public housing and market housing. And what I find interesting in this is that there's kind of this inherent acknowledgement that the market was not going to provide deeply affordable housing. It never did, and it never will, and we know this. And so that's kind of a running theme that we're obviously going to come back to. How do we create those deeply affordable units without the kind of investment that we had in the 30s and 40s and up to the 1970s, where there was that shift from public housing to privatization? Obviously, AMI was kind of carried over during the Tax Reform Act. It's used in LIHTC and in the kind of tax credit driven market and production of affordable housing. And it actually was not intended to be such a significant metric. And LIHTC wasn't anticipated to become the primary vehicle for affordable housing production as it has become. So there are two main issues with how AMI works. The first is that it takes all of the households in a region, homeowners and renters, and it looks at all of those income levels. When essentially all of our programs, both for rental and for first-time home buyers, obviously are targeting people who are tenants. Even those first-time home buyers are tenants. And so that, as you see in the bottom graph, the median income of tenant households versus the median income of owner-occupied households, there's quite a bit of a difference here. And so it would be more accurate to relate to the median income only of tenant households when speaking about programs that are targeted for tenants. And the other issue is that, as we know, urban and regional areas tend to have urban and rural areas tend to have different income levels. We can see this when we look at this affordability spectrum from Dutchess County. We have another one in the paper that refers to Westchester County, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what's in there, where you can really see how the AMI thresholds, the ones in that light blue, the AMI thresholds don't necessarily line up. In fact, they necessarily do not line up with tenant income levels. So you can see, for example, on the top there, Beacon median income for tenants only, that maximum rent for for a median earning tenant, that max rent is under $1,900, whereas the AMI for the 80% AMI threshold for a four-person household, which is the affordable set aside in Beacon, is over 2,000. And so you have a disconnect between the tenants who are looking for affordable housing and those AMI thresholds. And you can see again that the AMI levels that account for the suburban and rural predominantly ownership households are kind of pulling those AMI levels higher than what would be relevant for tenants alone. And of course, this doesn't only impact rents; it also impacts home buyers, as we saw in that silly cartoon in the beginning. There, in no county in the Hudson Valley can a household earning 100% of AMI afford a median sale price of a home for sale right now. This is from our out of reach report from last year. And you can read a little bit more about the methodology for how we got this graph in that report if you're interested. And so the takeaways here, if we summarize all of the issues with using AMI, first of all, average tenants in the Hudson Valley are somewhere between 30 and 50% AMI for a single householder. That jumps a little bit to up to 66%, I think it was, for a two-person household at AMI. And then at the same time, market rents in some areas like Putnam and Rockland counties require an income level that's significantly higher than 100% of AMI. So there's no real meaningful insight here when we use AMI thresholds. It doesn't necessarily translate to an insight about a household's ability to pay. It's not like we're saying, oh, this person earns 100% AMI and therefore they can afford 100% of a median home price, and so and there's so many geographic discrepancies in who can afford what and where that it really, even though it's a metric that we can apply uniformly, it doesn't have uniform meaning across all geographies. Now, at the same time, what we heard from developers is that rents below 60% AMI don't cover costs. And because LIHTC is a development subsidy rather than an operating subsidy, it just doesn't pencil, right? We've all heard that term. It just doesn't pencil to offer rents below 60% AMI. Now, in many LIHTC developments, 60% is an average, and so you can get significantly lower rents as long as you balance it out with higher rents. So it's certainly I'm certainly not saying that developments that are funded through LIHTC cannot supply lower income housing. They most certainly can. However, it is challenge. This is definitely a consideration that we need to take into account. And then there are specific takeaways for municipal leaders who are looking to design set aside mandates, and we're happy to have any follow-up conversations with any of you who are in those municipal positions and interested in designing mandates that really meet the need. As we saw in that income threshold, 80% AMI, which is kind of it's a fairly typical affordability target in set-asides. 80% AMI is above most income levels of most tenants. The other issue with mandates is that once I heard a few stories from practitioners that if a tenant gets a raise and they get kind of priced out of that affordable apartment, they're forced into a trade-off where they either have to move or jump from $1,800 a month to $3,000 a month, or basically refuse the raise. And we did hear about at least one story where someone chose to refuse a raise and ask their employer not to give them a raise because they didn't want to leave where they live. So that's something that we really need to think about. In LIHTC, that's less of an issue because HCR is very flexible and because, again, if you're in a development where there's an averaging of that 60%, then if someone is bumped up in their income, then whatever new apartments become available, you're targeting lower income levels in order to achieve that balance. And the other issue is that in fact, we've heard many landlords, not all, but many landlords do have income checks that are at least 3 times the rent. And what happens there is that, for example, tenants with a voucher, even if their voucher would cover that 80% rent, they would not qualify for that apartment because they don't have that income level. So that's one issue. And then also those income checks do create a very narrow eligibility band where you have the minimum income you have to have. The maximum is the percent AMI that is being targeted, such that in the city of Beacon, for example, what they did was actually raise the eligibility to 90% AMI so that they could increase the eligibility pool for tenants. Whereas in New Rochelle, what they did was actually reduce the set-aside amount to 70% AMI, so 70 to 80, right? And so you can expand that window in one of two ways. The takeaway is that our programs are not creating the affordable housing that we need. This is no surprise to anybody. But there are some things we can do within this environment that we have. The first is the graduated affordability bands, incorporating those into mandates if we create those. The other thing is the stigma with AMI percentages. I'm sure many of you have heard 80% AMI is low income. I'm sorry, but 80% AMI is not low income. It's much higher than the median tenant earnings. And getting away from low income or very low income, which is 50% AMI, and using terms like, describing the professions that are involved or, sorry, associated with these different AMI thresholds is a much more humanizing way and less stigmatizing way to talk about who we are serving. The obvious need here is for operating subsidies and permanent affordability. We hear a lot about expiring subsidies with for-profit developers. For municipalities, when we talk about homeownership, we now have an opt-in property tax exemption in New York State, where municipalities can opt into a partial exemption for first-time home buyers who are acquiring a subsidized home ownership opportunity. So I think we actually have Al Belanchia from Columbia County Habitat who was kind of spearheading that initiative. If you have any questions, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer. And some of the other ideas is for mandates specifically to kind of supplement AMI with some more localized data that actually reflects the real lived experience and the economic realities of the tenants in those areas. Aligning set aside mandates with vouchers as we discussed so that people who are eligible for a voucher can still qualify for those. Exploring the income requirements that landlords impose. And then also just avoiding the default 80% AMI when we design mandates because it really doesn't, as we've seen, really doesn't meet that the deeper need for affordable rentals. And it doesn't always, 80% AMI does not always generate submarket rent. So what's next for us? This is my last slide. Thank you for bearing with me. As I mentioned earlier, AMI is not going anywhere. But the other issue is that no matter the metric, deeper affordability doesn't pencil. And so the questions we need to ask, regardless of whether or not AMI is an effective metric, um, these are three questions that we are now, because of this research that we've done, what's the next step, right? What's the deeper dive here? I think there is a question about nonprofit and for-profit developments and what's possible affordability-wise in each instance. We've received this question a number of times. And this is something I think we are looking to explore a little bit more. And what type of subsidy would generate that type of housing development that would be affordable to the average tenant? So with that, uh, let's have a conversation. Let's open the floor. We can raise hands or just take yourself off mute and start talking if you want.
Malka, there is one question in the chat. If you just want to peek, it came
Oh,
from
sure.
Vicky.
I
She said,
forgot
I
about
would love to hear more about what the viable solutions are when a tenant gets a raise that pushes them out of eligibility.
Great question. So I think just incorporating into a policy that there is some sort of, I mean, it's a dilemma, right? Because you want to make sure that you're providing the most affordable rent possible and to make sure that new tenants can access that affordable rent. And at the same time, you want to promote stability. So what you could do is just say once a tenant's in there, they're in there. And once they leave, you bring in a new tenant that's back at that original price. That's what they've done in New York City in many rent stabilized apartments. Again, there are pros and cons to each approach, but I mean, I would think that the graduated affordability bands or just saying once a tenant's in there, they're in there. I think those are two clear options.
Does
And I,
that, quick question on that, how does that play with the grants and LIHTC that have eligibility requirements?
so that what I just shared is specifically for the mandates. There's a lot of local flexibility in the mandates. When it comes to LIHTC, it's less of an issue because again, HCR is fairly flexible there, and their preference is not to displace tenants. And so what happens there is if there is a goal of an uh, average income of 60% AMI in a development, if someone gets a raise and if their income increases and they're, let's say, now at 75% AMI, then the next tenant they'll bring in is going to be at, whatever it is, 45% AMI, and they'll kind of average each other out. So as soon as there's a vacated unit, the target for that unit is a deeper level of affordability. So there's this constant dance in those LIHTC projects of trying to maintain that average. Does that answer the question I'm not sure who asked it, but I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does.
Uh, Ian, fundamentally, the real issue is construction costs. Yes. So I think the issue with construct one suggestion that we heard is to revisit some of the cost prohibitive regulations, which I mean, which are tricky, right? Like we know we're hearing a little bit about seeker reform, right? Time is money in some of those processes that adds to the cost. Some of the regulations around energy or even fire safety. For example, we've heard that the cost of the second staircase in a multi-story development can be cost prohibitive. But can you, Ian, do you mind just sharing what would be helpful in this moment to respond to?
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think in terms of driving down costs of new construction, there's a lot of really good stuff. There's a lot of really good efforts around that. I think they'll take a lot of time to pay off if and when they do pay off. What I'm just conceptually, I struggle with seeing that cost for new construction is $650,000 a unit for affordable housing or market rate housing in pretty much anywhere in the state or most places in the country, if not more. Like me and my wife both make six figures. We can't afford a $650,000 house. So like this just fundamentally, mis there's just like a misalignment there. So like, are there strategies? And there's a lot of historic building stuff that goes um, under occupied across New York State, Hudson Valley especially. Um, and I'm just curious, are there other approaches around providing affordable housing with the lower cost approaches around rehabilitation, around preservation, where the same dollar can produce more units?
So, unfortunately, in my experience, rehabilitation is not all that less expensive. It can be extremely expensive. Vicky can speak to that from, Pine Hill and restoring some of those vacant buildings is actually extremely cost prohibitive. I I mean, I would love to see more. I mean, I think some of the prefab ADU options, what we're not seeing anymore is trailer home parks, which were some of the most, affordable options for people. I'm not saying that that's an option for everyone, but the way that we've been building is not the way that we have to build. I mean, there are prefab panels, there are, there is new technology that's significantly less expensive than how we've been building. There's modular, I think new technology is going to play a big role in this. And I also do think that there is room, again, there is room to investigate the differences between for-profit and nonprofit affordable housing developers. I'm not, it's just it's something that we should be talking about and looking at and seeing uh, if that hypothesis, is true or not. And if it's true, what do we do with it? Um, so, between it's a puzzle. I don't have the answers. I wonder if someone here does, because if they do, I'm out of a job, which would be great. Um,
I've, can I throw something in here?
Absolutely.
Um, two things. One is, excuse me, Jan Jaffe, who I don't think is on this call, is leading on the Pine Hill Wellington project. Um, she said she's working on a paper called Grant Death by a Thousand Grant Applications. But her argument is that actually doing affordable housing with all the, with a lot of subsidies and free money and grants and stuff like that is actually more expensive in the long run. I think partly because of the time it takes, partly because of all of the regulatory compliance and all this other stuff. I haven't been through that process, so I can't vouch for that. But we're looking at a project in Phoenicia where we are trying to acquire a 19-unit apartment building that's fully occupied. It's going to need some renovation, but not we don't have to do it like immediately. We don't have to displace people. Um, we're finding that actually, and the rents there are sort of organically occurring. It's not a regulated affordable housing property, but most of the rents, I don't think there's any rent there that's above 30% AMI. So we're looking at acquiring this, and we've actually, because it's for sale on the open market, we don't have time to put together a capital stack with grants and subsidies. So we're looking at using private equity and well, private investors, just local community people who have money, and putting together a fund. But what we're finding is that we actually can get it to pencil without raising the rents and still offer like a 9% return on investment. And that is adding a mortgage into the equation. Now, obviously, building new housing is a lot more expensive, but I guess the question for me um, is building affordable housing relying on grants and subsidies the way to go? Because I don't know that it's necessarily cheaper, and it takes forever, and I don't think we're getting enough housing built.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Vicky, I think, and I didn't mention this, but one of the other, when I talked about assessing the regulatory environment and the costs associated with regulations, um, of course, some of the comments we received were about the legal fees that are required to even navigate LIHTC in the first place. And so I do think that in general, to your point, there is room for a deeper dive into, okay, what are these costs? What is this $650,000? How much of that is a hard construction cost? How much of that is something else? Uh, there's one more question in the chat, and Noelle, I want to just hear yours, and maybe I can address them both at the same time.
Sure. I don't know. It'll be impressive if you can adjust them both. But my question is two separate points. One is, and this is the premise for the question, actually. It'll make more sense. I understand that Westchester County has one of the highest AMIs, and, by association, a very high cost of living. Is there any other formula or maybe an adjustment on the AMI that we can consider to sort of close this gap and redefine what affordability means? Because it's a bit of a joke, the disconnect between what we call affordability using the AMI formula versus what people can really cover through, their earnings. And we are, I mean, I'm glad somebody was very transparent talking about a 2 6-figure household, and so many folks are under that. and it's just a major disconnect. So I'm curious whether we can go back to the academics and look at the formula in general, like a plus minus adjustment piece, to make it more realistic. And secondarily, and only by association, but only because you guys were talking about the housing, I know they're very different markets, but I think a lot of the Midwest, South, they figured out how to do housing for a lot cheaper. And again, I concede those are different markets, but there's got to be something we can emulate from them because of how they're able to streamline the costs, construction and otherwise so well. But yeah, if you can speak to those two
Yeah,
issues, please.
and absolutely. So, with regards to your first one, I think getting creative is the next step. I do think that, when we say vaguely that we should be looking more at hyper-localized data and median income levels of tenants alone without the median income of homeowners, I think that's an obvious first step to really overcome that gap that you're talking about. So what that would look like, unfortunately, we that wasn't part of this project, but if anyone is interested in chatting more about, and brainstorming and maybe putting out another few pages about ideas, specific ideas, and even running some scenarios of what that would look like, I'd be very interested in doing that. If you'd like, just drop your name in the chat and we can reach out to you. With regards to the second one, maybe this is a good plug. Our annual housing conference, we are hopefully going to have a speaker. It's not 100% confirmed yet, so I'm not going to say who it is. But hopefully we will have a speaker who will be bringing a national lens and best practices from across the country. Because I agree with you that we don't always do a very good job at looking outside of our immediate region. The last question I want to address, and I'm sorry that this is very brief. I know we're at time, we're even past time. So the question here is, by what percent would a free land lease from a municipality reduce the rental cost? Unfortunately, I don't know what percent precisely. I would be interested, absolutely. I imagine that the response to that question would be, it depends. It depends on the local market. It depends on land costs, right? I imagine in a place like Westchester County, um, or New York City, the free land lease would reduce the costs immensely, whereas in places that are perhaps less in demand market-wise, that might not have such an impact. However, I would say that community land trusts, where the land is owned by a nonprofit, and the homes themselves are what are bought or what are purchased, right? If someone owns a house that's on land that's owned by a community land trust, then we're removing land speculation from the equation here, and that's certainly an interesting and viable option. We have a few new community land trusts in the Hudson Valley, Taproot in Kingston, Trillium up in Columbia County. I might be forgetting one or two, but that's definitely a model that we are very interested in, and we do incorporate that into many of our recommendations for municipalities who are creating affordable housing plans and comprehensive plans. I think we're out of time. Thank you all so much and for being engaged and for bringing yourselves on video. It's nice to see smiling faces. I hope this was helpful. And please do reach out if you want to talk more about this. If you have any other ideas, we love ideas.